$187,000. That's what I wired into a stranger's bank account on a Tuesday afternoon in March, sitting in my kitchen in my socks, feeling like the smartest man in America. I thought I was buying a business, a real one. 14 employees, a warehouse full of inventory, a client list that read like a phone book of mid-sized manufacturing firms in the Midwest. I had the financials. I had the tax returns. I had a woman named Renee Castellans sitting across from me at a steakhouse in Cincinnati, sliding a leather folder across the table and saying, "This is the opportunity of your life. I almost don't want to sell it." 9 days after the wire hit her account, her phone number was disconnected. 11 days after that, the warehouse turned out to be a self-storage unit rented under a name that wasn't hers. And the 14 employees? They didn't exist. Not one of them. She thought she'd done it clean. She thought she was 3 states away and untraceable, sipping something expensive on somebody else's dime, laughing about the sucker in Ohio who signed on the dotted line without blinking. She was wrong. Dead wrong. It took me 3 weeks, 21 days to be exact, to find out her real name, her real location, and the 6 other people she'd done this to before me. And when I was done, she didn't just lose the $187,000. She lost everything she'd built her entire fake life on. This is the story of how I became a fraud investigator. Without a badge, without a law degree, and without a single ounce of experience, because nobody else was going to do it for me. This is the story of how I got every dollar back, and how a woman who thought she was smarter than everyone in the room found out she wasn't smarter than a guy with a spreadsheet, a library card, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Stick around, because the way this ends, it is deeply, deeply satisfying. Before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome. Every week on this channel, I tell you true stories about greed, betrayal, and the long, slow, methodical process of getting every single dollar back from the people who think they can steal it and vanish. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a cop. I'm just a guy who got burned badly enough that I learned how the system actually works. Bank wire tracing, UCC filings, skip tracing, small claims judgments, all of it. And I'm going to walk you through exactly how I used it. If you've ever been scammed, ripped off, ghosted by a business partner, or lied to by someone who looked you dead in the eye and snarled while they did it, this channel is for you. Hit subscribe because next week's story involves a fake charity, a Ponzi scheme disguised as a church, and a woman who is right now still on the run. But today, we start with Renee. Let me back up. Do you understand how I ended up handing over $187,000 to a woman I'd known for 6 weeks? You have to understand where I was in my life at that point. I was 41 years old. I'd spent 18 years as a regional operations manager for a logistics company outside Cincinnati, and in the winter of that year, the company got acquired, and my position got restructured, which is corporate speak for "you're gone, but we'll give you a nice severance so you don't sue us." I took the $94,000 severance, I took the $61,000 sitting in my 401k that I could roll into a self-directed account, and I told myself I was finally going to do the thing I'd talked about for a decade, buy a small business and run it myself. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think it matters for anyone watching this who's been through something similar. I was not naive. I was not stupid. I had run a P&L. I had negotiated vendor contracts worth millions of dollars. I genuinely thought, that my professional experience made me immune to being conned. That belief is exactly what she was counting on. I found the listing on a business for sale marketplace, one of those sites where brokers post small companies for acquisition, usually in the $200,000 to $2 million range. The listing was for a precision parts distribution company based out of Dayton, Ohio, with $1.4 million in annual revenue, 14 employees, and an asking price of $210,000 for a quick sale because the owner, a woman listed only as RC, was relocating to care for a sick parent. I reached out. Within an hour, I had a response from Renee Castellon. She was warm, professional. She didn't oversell. And looking back, that restraint was the first tell, because real con artists don't oversell. They underpromise and let you talk yourself into believing more than they ever claimed. She told me she was not in a rush, that she'd rather sell to the right person than the first person, and that she had 2 other interested buyers, but wanted to see if I was a good fit for the company's culture. That phrase, good fit for the company's culture, is something I now recognize as a classic trust-building technique. It reframes a financial transaction as a relationship. It makes you feel chosen, not sold to. Over the next 3 weeks, Renee sent me what looked like a complete due diligence package: 2 years of tax returns, a profit and loss statement, a balance sheet, an accounts receivable aging report, and photos of the warehouse floor with pallets of inventory stacked to the ceiling. She had a website. She had a LinkedIn profile with 800 connections and recommendations from people claiming to be former clients. She had a Google business listing with 34 reviews averaging 4.7 stars. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. Every single one of those things can be faked, purchased, or manufactured by someone with $500 and a weekend. The tax returns were altered PDFs, real IRS forms with fabricated numbers dropped in using a PDF editor. The website was 6 weeks old, registered anonymously through a domain privacy service. The LinkedIn recommendations came from accounts that were themselves less than 2 months old. And the Google reviews? Later, when I dug into it, I found a Fiverr gig, $5 per review, that matched the exact posting pattern of 30 of those 34 reviews, all posted within a 48-hour window, 4 months before I found the listing. But at the time, it all looked real. It looked like exactly what a small, boring, profitable industrial distribution business would look like. We met in person twice. Once at a coffee shop in Dayton where she brought a binder, an actual physical binder of vendor contracts and client purchase orders. And once at that steakhouse I mentioned, where she told me about her mother's declining health in Arizona and how much it meant to her that the business would go to someone who'd take care of the guys, meaning the 14 phantom employees. She cried a little at that dinner. I remember it clearly because it's the moment I stopped doing diligence and started doing damage control on her behalf, reassuring her, telling her I'd keep the team intact, telling her this was going to work out for both of us. That's the moment. That's the exact moment con artists are trained, whether formally or through pure practiced instinct, to manufacture. The moment where the target switches from evaluating the deal to protecting the relationship. Looking back, the red flags were everywhere, and I want to walk through them because if you're watching this and you're in the middle of a deal that feels a little too warm, a little too personal, I want you to recognize these patterns before it's too late for you. Red flag number 1. She refused a formal escrow service, telling me her attorney always handled it this way. A direct wire to her personal LLC's operating account, not a business escrow account, not an attorney trust account. Red flag number 2. Every financial document I received was a PDF, never an original. Never something I could independently verify with a third party, like her accountant or her bank. Red flag number 3. When I asked to speak with even one of the 14 employees before closing, she said it would spook the team and create unnecessary anxiety before the transition was final. I accepted that explanation. Red flag number 4, and this is the one that haunts me the most. She pushed for a faster closing than I was comfortable with, citing a competing buyer, and I let the fear of losing the deal override my instinct to slow down. On a Tuesday in March, I wired $187,000, the full purchase price, minus a $23,000 deposit I'd already sent 2 weeks earlier, into the operating account of a company called Castellan Precision Holdings, LLC. The wire cleared at 2:14 p.m. By 2:20 p.m., I had the keys, or what I thought were the keys, to my new business. By the following Monday, Renee Castellan had stopped answering her phone. The first time I called and it went straight to a disconnected number message, I told myself it was a billing issue. Phones get suspended for all kinds of reasons. I drove to the address listed for the warehouse, a light industrial park on the east side of Dayton, the following Wednesday, 4 days after the wire cleared. The unit was a self-storage facility, not a warehouse. Unit 214, roughly 10 feet by 15 feet, empty, completely empty except for a single broken pallet and a layer of dust that told me nothing had been moved in or out in a long time. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I sat with it for a lot longer than a second. I stood in front of a rolled-up steel storage door that was supposed to contain $1.4 million worth of annual business operations, and instead it contained nothing. Not 14 employees, not pallets of precision parts, nothing. I called the number for the office manager listed on the company letterhead, a woman named Deb Whitfield who I'd exchanged 3 emails with during due diligence. Disconnected. I called the accountant listed on the tax returns, a firm called Reller and Associates CPA. The number connected to a dry cleaner in Columbus. Reller and Associates did not exist. I drove to the address on the LLC's registration with the Ohio Secretary of State. It was a UPS store, a mailbox, Suite 214, the same number as the storage unit, which I now recognize as either a coincidence or a small, careless detail from someone who was moving fast and reusing numbers she liked. That's when the floor dropped out from under me, not gradually, all at once. I remember standing in the parking lot of that UPS store with my phone in my hand, doing math I did not want to do. $210,000. Nearly my entire severance and half my retirement savings, gone, into an account that, as I would soon learn, had already been drained. I want to be honest about the emotional part of this too, because the financial devastation and the emotional devastation hit in different waves. The first wave was pure panic, the kind where your chest feels tight and you can't quite get a full breath. The second wave, a few hours later, was shame. I'd told my brother about this deal. I'd told 2 former coworkers I was hoping to hire. I'd told my ex-wife, who I still had a cordial relationship with because of our teenage daughter, and her response replayed in my head on a loop. The third wave, and the one that lasted the longest, was rage. Not at myself, eventually. That came and went. But at her, at the specific, deliberate choices she'd made to build a fake company, detailed enough to survive a former operations manager's scrutiny. Someone had spent real time on this, real effort, and I was not her first target. I could feel that in my bones before I ever proved it. I called my bank that afternoon. This is important for anyone watching who finds themselves in a similar situation. Wire transfers are not like credit card charges. There is no automatic chargeback. Once a wire clears and the receiving bank releases the funds, recovery depends entirely on speed and cooperation between financial institutions. I was 4 days out. the window where a bank can sometimes claw back a fraudulent wire, usually 24 to 48 hours if you're lucky, and the receiving bank is cooperative, had already closed. My bank's fraud department opened a case. They told me, gently but plainly, that the funds had already been moved out of the receiving account within 36 hours of the wire clearing, into what looked like a series of smaller transfers, a pattern banks call layering, a classic money laundering technique designed to break the trail into pieces too small and too scattered to easily follow. I filed a police report with the Dayton Police Department that same week. I want to be fair to them, they took the report seriously, and the detective assigned was straightforward with me about what I was up against. Financial fraud cases involving shell companies and out-of-state actors are resource-intensive, and a mid-sized municipal police department simply does not have unlimited hours to dedicate to a single six-figure fraud case when they've got a stack of them. "I'm not telling you we won't work it," he told me. "I'm telling you that you should not wait on us to work it." That sentence changed the entire direction of the next 3 weeks of my life. I filed a complaint with the FTC through their Report Fraud portal and a separate complaint with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, because wire fraud that crosses state lines falls under federal jurisdiction. Both complaints generate case reference numbers that feed into larger fraud databases law enforcement can cross-reference against other victims. I didn't know it yet, but that detail, the cross-referencing, would end up being critical to how this whole thing unraveled. I also, and I say this because I think it's an underrated step, contacted an attorney the same week. Not to sue anyone yet, there was no one to sue, no real name to attach to a lawsuit, but to understand my legal options. She told me something I'll never forget. The law can get you a judgment. It cannot get you money that doesn't exist. Your job right now is not legal. Your job right now is find where the money went. That was the moment I stopped being a victim waiting for the system to help me and became something else entirely. I sat down at my kitchen table that Friday night with a legal pad, my laptop, every email Renee Castellan had ever sent me, every PDF, every text message, and I made a decision. I was going to find her. Not because I thought I was some kind of amateur detective genius, because I had 18 years of operations experience, reading contracts, tracing invoices, finding discrepancies in vendor paperwork, and I realized, sitting there, that finding a person who lies for a living is not that different from finding a $40,000 accounting error in a supply chain. It's the same skill. Follow the paper. Follow the inconsistencies. Follow the money. And that's when I found the smoking gun. I want to slow down here because this is the part of the story people ask me about the most. How does a regular person with no investigative training actually find someone who doesn't want to be found? The answer is you don't find them all at once. You find them one small, boring detail at a time, and you write every single one down. Buried in the metadata of one of the PDF tax returns she'd sent me, something I only checked because a friend who works in IT mentioned that PDFs carry hidden author and creation data, was a name. Not Renee Castellan, a different name entirely, one that had been used to create the document and never fully scrubbed before the file was sent to me. The name was Renata Castell. I ran that name through every public record search tool I could find, some free, some paid. This is legal, by the way, and important to say clearly. Everything I'm about to describe is publicly available information, accessed through legitimate consumer background check services and public county and state records databases. I was not hacking anything. I was reading what was already there for anyone willing to look. The first hit was a Renata Castell with a previous address in Scottsdale, Arizona. That detail lined up. Remember, Renee had told me at that steakhouse dinner about her mother's declining health in Arizona. Liars are, more often than you'd think, lazy in a specific way. They build their fake identity out of pieces of the truth, because pure invention is exhausting to maintain under pressure. She hadn't invented a state. She'd used a real one from her own life. From that Scottsdale address, a public records search turned up a small claims court filing from 4 years earlier. A landlord suing a Renata Castell for $4,200 in unpaid rent and property damage. The court record included her full legal name, her date of birth, and critically, a former employer listed on the original lease application, a company called Vantage Business Brokers. I called Vantage Business Brokers the next morning, pretending to be a prospective employer doing a reference check, which I want to be honest is a small deception on my part and I don't love that I did it, but I was desperate for information and it was, at minimum, legal. I wasn't impersonating a specific real person or committing fraud. I was a private citizen asking questions. The woman who answered told me Renata had worked there for 8 months, 4 years earlier, in an entry-level role helping brokers prepare listing packages for businesses being sold. She was actually really good at making the marketing materials look sharp, the woman told me. We let her go because some numbers on a couple of client P&Ls didn't match what the client gave us directly. We figured it was a mistake at the time. It wasn't a mistake. It was training. She had learned on someone else's dime, in a completely legitimate job, exactly how real business sale documents are formatted, what real due diligence packages look like, and, most usefully for her future crimes, how buyers evaluate them. She had turned a real skill set into a criminal one. And that's when I found the smoking gun. Because once I had her real name and her employment history, I could search for civil court records under Renata Castell nationwide, and I found her, twice more. A civil suit in Nevada, a man named Gregory Ashford suing Renata Castell, doing business as Castell Ventures LLC, for $94,000 related to the sale of a business that, according to the complaint, did not exist as represented. The case had ended in a default judgment against her, meaning she never showed up to defend herself, and the court ruled in Ashford's favor. But a default judgment against a person who can't be located is worth exactly nothing. Ashford never collected a dollar. The second case was in Colorado a year later. Similar pattern. Similar amount, in the low 6 figures, similar outcome. A default judgment nobody could ever collect on because she'd already moved states, changed the spelling of her name slightly, and set up a new LLC. Remé Castellón, Renata Cass, Renata Castellón in the Colorado filing. 3 names, 1 person, and at least 3 victims before me, soon to be discovered as 6. I reached out to Gregory Ashford directly. This was, without question, the turning point of the entire investigation. He was stunned to hear from me, stunned that anyone had connected the dots between his case and a new one 3 years later. We spent 2 hours on the phone comparing notes, and between the 2 of us, we reconstructed a pattern. She operated in roughly 18 to 24-month cycles. Move to a new city, build a fake local business over 2 to 3 months using real market research and a rented or borrowed physical location for showings, find a buyer with liquid capital, usually someone recently laid off with a severance package or a retirement rollover because those people have cash and a motivation to move fast, close the deal, drain the funds through layered transfers within 72 hours, and disappear before the buyer even fully processes what happened. Ashford put me in touch with 2 other victims he'd found through his own research after his case went cold. A woman in Tennessee who'd lost $76,000, and a man in Georgia who'd lost $130,000. Suddenly, there were 4 of us, then 5. Comparing timelines, bank routing numbers, LLC filings, and, this was the real gift, bank account numbers from our own wire confirmations that, when compared, showed overlapping intermediary accounts. The same layering pattern moved through at least 2 of the same shell accounts across different states. With 5 victims and a documented pattern, this stopped being one man's $187,000 problem and became what federal investigators actually care about: a pattern of interstate wire fraud. I compiled everything: every name variation, every LLC filing, every court case number, every bank routing number we could legally share with each other, every fake employee name, every metadata fingerprint from the PDFs, into a single document, nearly 40 pages, and I sent it to the FBI field office handling my complaint, CCing the other 4 victims' complaint numbers so the pattern would be impossible to miss in their system. 2 weeks in, we had a near miss that still makes my stomach turn thinking about it. Through a skip tracing service, a legitimate paid service private investigators and process servers use to locate people through utility connections, vehicle registrations, and address history, we found a current address for a Renata Castellone in Reno, Nevada. I drove 12 hours overnight to get there, arriving at 6 a.m., half convinced I was about to knock on her door myself, which in retrospect was not my smartest moment, and something my attorney later told me, quite firmly, never to do again for my own safety. The apartment was vacant. A neighbor told me the woman who'd lived there had moved out maybe 4 or 5 days ago, in kind of a hurry. She was one step ahead of us, and for about 6 hours that morning, sitting in a Denny's parking lot in Reno at 7 a.m., I genuinely believed I'd lost her, that she'd felt the net tightening and simply vanished into a new name in a new state, the way she'd apparently done at least twice before. But this time was different, and here's why. This time, there were 5 of us looking, not 1. And this time, we weren't just chasing her, we'd handed a documented cross-state pattern to federal investigators who had subpoena power we didn't have. The FBI could do something none of us could: legally compel banks to disclose account holder information and follow the money through the layered transfers using actual regulatory authority. I got the call on a Thursday morning. I was standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd wired that $187,000 sitting in my socks, when the detective, who'd stayed in loose contact with me even after handing the bulk of the case to federal investigators, called and said 4 words I will remember for the rest of my life. They found her. Arrested. I sat down on the floor. I'm not too proud to tell you that. Here's what the investigation ultimately uncovered, and it's bigger than I ever imagined sitting in that Denny's parking lot in Reno. Renata Castell had run this exact scheme: fake business, fake due diligence package, fake employees, real charm, 6 separate times over roughly 7 years, across 5 states: Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, Tennessee, Georgia, and finally Ohio with me. Total documented losses across all 6 victims came to just over $612,000. 3 days after the Reno dead end, I got a call from a special agent working the case. They'd traced the layered transfers from my $187,000, along with pieces of the other victims' funds, into an account under yet another name: Renata C. Sorensen, this time in Las Vegas, tied to a luxury short-term rental lease signed just 11 days earlier. 21 days after I wired that money into a stranger's bank account, federal agents executed a warrant at a rental property in Las Vegas, Nevada. Renata Castell, real name, confirmed by fingerprint match to a driver's license issued under her birth name in Arizona 9 years earlier, was arrested without incident. The federal case charged her with wire fraud, which carries a potential sentence of up to 20 years per count when it involves financial institutions, along with additional state-level charges of theft by deception filed by Ohio prosecutors that ran concurrently with the federal case. Because the fraud crossed state lines and used wire transfers, federal jurisdiction took the lead, with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit coordinating with prosecutors in each affected state. She did not go to trial, facing what her own attorney reportedly described as overwhelming documentary evidence: the metadata, the court records, the pattern across 6 victims, and bank records the FBI had subpoenaed, showing the layered transfers in granular detail. She accepted a plea agreement roughly 5 months after her arrest. She pled guilty to 2 federal counts of wire fraud and was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, along with a restitution order requiring her to repay the full $612,000 to her 6 victims collectively as a condition of any future supervised release and parole consideration. Now, I want to be straight with you about something because I think it matters for anyone watching this hoping for a perfectly clean ending. Restitution orders are not magic. A judge ordering someone to pay back $612,000 does not mean $612,000 appears in your bank account the next morning. Most of what she'd stolen had already been spent on rent for a lifestyle designed to look successful enough to attract her next set of victims, on the luxury rentals, on clothes and dinners exactly like the one she'd taken me to at that steakhouse in Cincinnati. Here's the part that genuinely surprised me, and it's the twist I promised you at the start. When federal investigators finished tracing every dollar, they found that a significant portion of the money, not all of it, but more than I expected, hadn't been spent on lifestyle at all. It had gone toward paying off a portion of the debt from her first known scheme, the one against Gregory Ashford in Nevada, years before mine. She had, in a strange and almost pathetic way, been running each new fraud partly to cover the unpaid judgment from the last one, a fraud pyramid built entirely out of her own unpaid debts, chasing her own tail for years, each new victim funding the illusion that the last scheme had been survivable. It didn't make me feel sympathy for her. If anything, it made the whole thing feel sadder and colder at the same time. 6 lives disrupted, 6 people's trust broken, not even for a payoff she got to keep, but to service a debt from her own first crime that she never had the courage to simply stop running from. Through the restitution order and a civil judgment my attorney and I pursued separately, which allowed us to place a lien against whatever assets could still be identified in her name, including a vehicle and a small amount of jewelry seized during the arrest, I recovered $141,000 of my original $187,000 over the following 14 months, paid out in structured payments the Department of Justice's Financial Litigation Unit garnished directly from her prison work assignments, and later wage garnishment once she's released and working under supervised release conditions. It is not the full amount. I want to be honest about that because too many of these stories end with a neat bow that isn't always realistic. But it is $141,000 more than I had the day I stood in that empty storage unit in Dayton, and it is money that exists because 5 strangers refused to let one woman disappear into a 6th identity. As for me, I did eventually buy a business. 8 months after the FBI arrested Renata Castell, I purchased a small commercial cleaning company outside Columbus for a fraction of what I'd wired into that first fraudulent deal through a licensed business broker with a real attorney-managed escrow account, 3 independent verification calls to actual current employees before I signed anything, and a due diligence process that took 11 weeks instead of 3. It's not glamorous. It has 11 real employees whose names I know personally, whose payroll I run myself, and whose faces I see every single week. Some days, that ordinariness is the most satisfying part of this whole story. I still keep the folder, the original leather one Renee Castellan handed me at that steakhouse, in a drawer in my office. Not out of sentiment, as a reminder of exactly how good a well-built lie can look, and exactly how much slower I need to move the next time something feels almost too easy. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's not don't trust anyone, That's not a way to live, and it's not really the lesson. The lesson is, verify before you trust with your money, no matter how warm, how professional, or how emotionally compelling the person in front of you seems. So here are the warning signs, pulled directly from what I lived through, that I want you to actually remember. 1. Anyone who pushes for a direct wire into a personal or LLC operating account instead of a licensed escrow or attorney trust account is asking you to skip the one step designed specifically to protect you. Insist on escrow, every time. 2. Financial documents that only exist as PDFs, that you can't independently verify with a third party like a CPA firm you can call yourself, or a bank you can confirm directly, should be treated as unverified until proven otherwise. 3. If you're not allowed to speak with employees, clients, or vendors before closing a deal, that is not normal business caution. That is isolation, and isolation is a tactic. 4. Artificial urgency, a competing buyer, a deadline that conveniently appears right when you're starting to have doubts, is one of the oldest tricks in the book because it still works on smart, careful people every single day. And 5. Check the metadata. On any PDF someone sends you claiming to be an official document, right-click, check the file properties, look at author and creation history. It takes 11 seconds, and it once helped me build a federal fraud case against a woman with 6 victims across 5 states. Renata Castell is currently serving her sentence in federal prison. When she's released, she'll owe restitution she'll likely spend years paying off in small, garnished amounts, and she'll do it under supervision that makes running this scheme a 7th time extraordinarily difficult. She thought she got away with it. She was wrong. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever been scammed, ghosted by a business partner, or burned by someone who looked you in the eye and lied, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments below. What happened, what you did about it, and where things stand now. Some of the most powerful stories on this channel started as a single comment on a video just like this one. Subscribe if you haven't, because next week I'm telling you about a fake charity, a Ponzi scheme dressed up as a church, and a woman who, as of this recording, is still on the run. Thanks for watching, and remember, they always think they got away with it. They're always wrong.